of you here today have contributed significantly. I would like to just do a round robin of self-introduction, starting on my immediate left with Reg Cave. Reg?
I'm Reg Cave. I joined the club in 1954. The major reason for me being here is because in the renovations of 1959, 60, 61, under Bill Thompson, Alec Colley, and Les Wagner, I was chairman of the building committee, and I have some drawings to show you later.
I'm Harry Dingle. I joined this club in 1946. I first played the golf course in 1937 when it was just finished. I have nothing else to add.
I'm Alec McCoy, and I'm a new boy, I guess. I didn't join until 1947. But I think I can claim as being the first member of this club to play the golf course, which I did in 1936. I got a pass through my father from A.J.T. Taylor, who was promoter of the development of the British property. And he gave me a scorecard with a note on it to permit me to play anytime I wished, and there was no club at that point. But to bring along anybody I wished. I didn't do it without his permission, but I did hold a tournament, the Junior Board of Trade, which you probably remember, Ted, as being in existence in those days. We had 110 players come up here in 1937. And we took over didn't take it over, there's no the takeover. But we played 110 members, and it was an event that I clearly remember teeing off down at the sheds down, the machinery, the equipment sheds. The course was, I got out my diaries, and one of the comments I made the first time I played it was a tough course, but very pretty, which is not entirely true. It isn't that tough. Thank you.
I'm Doug Bajus, and I am one of the newer members, 1958, I believe, and I guess I'm here because I've been on the Green Committee for quite a few years. Maybe can contribute something.
My name is Brian Oak. I joined the club in 1981, and I'm the current president of Capilano.
I'm Norman Paquette. I joined in 1956. I was a member of the General Committee for a period and captain at one time, and I played fairly steadily the present time.
I'm Ted Wilkinson. I started caddying at Point Grey 72 years ago. Became a junior and an intermediate, transferred to Jericho Golf Club, which I was a member of for a year before joining up. I played my first round of golf up here with my father, who was a charter member, and I can't remember the exact year, but it was certainly either before or right at the beginning of it. When those of us who'd been a member of Jericho prior to the war came back, as you know, Jericho was expropriated, and General Clark and John Jukes and my father-in-law, Bob Arco, went to work, and the committee agreed to admit all of us returned veterans who had been members of Jericho into Capilano for nothing. So only making $225 a month, being married with a couple of children, that was a pretty good deal for most of us who came from Jericho. I take a certain amount of pride in that I was the first of the returning people to be elected to the committee, which I served for a while. I then, at one time, went on the board of directors after the club was purchased and became its president. and I've enjoyed 52 years of golf and social life at this club.
Thank you, Ted. Gentlemen, we've now been joined by Mr. Peter Stanley, and we'll ask Peter to tell us when he joined the club and just what his special interest has been here. Peter, you're on camera.
Well, I joined in January '52, and if the committee in those days had met in the month of December, I would have made it in '51. But that's how long ago. Nothing compared to Wilkinson and McCoy and Dingle.
Well, I'm already grateful to all of you because I've just been reminded of my relative youth, having joined here in 1968 and having enjoyed nearly 10 years on the board of directors in 2 different phases. But having observed during the last few decades some fascinating changes both within the clubhouse and out on the golf course. Now,
Did you get Dave Harper in on this?
he is being separately recorded, yes, and he will stay outside of the immediate circle of the conversation. Mr. David Harper is, in fact, the person, the expert in technical side of the recording, and we're very grateful to David. And David is a member of the Archives Committee, which was first struck as a standing committee in 1990 at the annual general meeting of that year. The Archives Committee, in fact, are behind the thrust to have us record some of our views and recollections of the way the clubhouse and the golf course have evolved. And I will then, I think, just ask Reg Cave to begin here in the clubhouse with some of his recollections and observations. And after we've all had an opportunity to comment on your individual recollections of the clubhouse, we'll then, perhaps in the second half of the recording, move on to some thoughts about the golf course itself. Reg, would you be kind enough to lead us off?
Yes, Bill. The first thing that I want to tell you is that after a lot of searching, and they seem to be the only 2 drawings left of the original clubhouse. This is going back to before the war. It would appear that over the years these things did exist. When I was chairman of the building committee under Bill Thompson and Alec and Les Wagner, when we did the first major change to the building after the men's locker room was built at the end, which was the first phase of a bigger scheme. The first phase was the locker room to free up the clubhouse for major alterations. Those drawings there, which you might want to look at, are copies only of the only drawings that I could find in the entire set of, and there are hundreds of drawings in this club in big rolls like this. The only one I could find, and I was very lucky to find them because they just fell out of a whole roll of drawings I was trying to examine. They're there. They don't have the original architect's name on them. They were copied by Thompson Berwick Pratt for their own use for the work they did on the original scheme. The basic original scheme was to do 2 things. On the ground floor, and you can look at these drawings afterwards or now, whatever you want, the locker room for the men was on the ground floor. It occupies what is now the grill, the golfer's grill, and it turned the corner and occupied what is now the expanded ladies' lounge. That's what it was. There was no view out on any of the walls because it was a locker room or toilets and so forth. There was absolutely no view to the south. It had looked as though it hadn't been looked at. And when you go on to the upstairs plan, you will notice on the south side, on the east side, looking partly towards the grounds, but mostly over North Van, there is a terrace which was alongside the original lounge up there. It was the coldest part of the club. Nobody ever used it. Even in the summer, after lunch, there was no sun in it at all, and it was used for storage for any of the garbage that the club wanted to house outside under a tarp or something. And it was most people didn't even know it was there. They thought it was just another roof of the thing, and that was there. And so I'm giving you just the highlights here. The basic thing was to bring that into the building, which has an immediate effect of expanding the old lounge. You remember how small it was? We couldn't get all the people who wanted to come to Calcutta dinners in there, and it partially cured that. On the south side, over the men's toilets, etc., was a whole bunch of little rooms. There was the blue room, the bamboo room, and a few others. They didn't seem to do anything in particular. Some of them had a view, another part of it didn't, but the view was sort of ignored. So, if you can remember, we cleaned all that out to give the total view over the city and the first fairway, and we put in a cocktail bar, the hope being that this would become a rendezvous, you know, for the fellows after work, before they went home. They would all meet up in that.
What year was that, Rich?
Well, we did it I was in the committee 60, 61, 62, somewhere in that area. And then we finally did all this, went to tender, and built it. And it was a great improvement. None of that, of course, could have been done until the locker room was built. That was phase one, and I wasn't in on that. But this was the next phase. We followed it up, of course, since with two more minor, and then the last one, a much bigger thing, which added space to the building.
Reg, I forget whether it was the blue room or the bamboo room, but in one of they were sort of adjoining, weren't
Yeah,
they?
that's right.
One of them had the first television set that the club ever had, because television didn't come to Vancouver until about 1954, just before the British Empire Games, the famous ones with Landy and Bannister. And I remember that TV set being there, and members of my family out from Montreal at the time of the first moonwalk, and we watched, it was a Sunday night, and we're having dinner here, and we watched it in that. So it disappeared in the 60s. Reg, you speak of these plans. Are these the original plans?
These are when I started the job of being chairman of the building committee for that particular thing, we had a set of drawings of the old building handy to us and given to the architect, Lloyd Jessup. These are just copies by them of the drawings. They were probably in bad shape, so they made a tracing of their own.
The reason I ask is that as a result of that letter that Dave Harper wrote to you last year, I spoke to Roy Spooner, who of course was Mr. Guinness until he retired, told him of the problems, and he got in touch with the people of Park Royal and in Dublin, and neither of them had any of the original plans.
Right. I'm sorry to say that that's probably the only. There's no elevations, no sections, no that. And just one last thing, and then I think I've said all I need to say about the job here. All that work enabled us then to, and we were required by law to put fire escapes in. That was the first time we got the balcony around all the east side and partway along the south side to give outdoor fitting. That was forced on us by the fire marshal, and one other thing about the fire marshal, we almost lost the fight when Jessamine went with 2 or 3 schemes to the building department in West Vancouver. The first thing they said was the circular stairway was a fire hazard, and you will put fire doors at the bottom if you came at the foot of the stairs. You'll have 2 on this floor, and on the upper floor you will then have another grade 1 fire escape, which would have made the goddamn place look like a prison. They got talked out of it. It was left to Jessamine kind of to work on it, and pressure. And, I don't know whether any of the presidents of the day got in on the act, but it was a...
I remember what you're saying very well, because I was on the board, and one of my daughters was getting married, and the reception was to be here. And of course, they changed upstairs, and the fire marshal said, "Oh, this is a danger. They shouldn't use that for that, and this is terrible." I was caught in between here. I had a daughter getting married. The fire marshal said, "It's a hazard. Don't let them use that." All the time.
Anyway, and the last thing that I recall, which would be of interest, was that we had, just for this, so that which is not a tremendous job, we had a lot of argument about the cost of it and whether it should be done at all. Now, we had 2 meetings in the ballroom at the Georgia Hotel. You remember that?
Well,
and there was a lot of anti things, and the 4 ringleaders were Colonel Swan, NCP Graves, Dr. Patterson, and Dick Bell Irving. I can't imagine 4 Catholic guys in that. And they said, very simply, that now we've got the locker room done, and we agree with sort of parts of this, but we don't need anything except a decent lunchroom for the men and perhaps something for the ladies a little bit. And that's all we're going to do. Upstairs, forget it. Forget views, forget cocktail lounges, forget bringing the, well, we had to bring the terrace in, but that had to be done anyway for other reasons. And they were quite adamant about it. Anything spent up here was an absolute waste of money and was no good for golf. And maybe they were right. I don't know. Well, that's all I got.
Well, Ray, that's wonderful.
And anybody wants to look at this, it's kind of interesting.
And certainly, gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree that when you hear what Reg has just told us, and look now at this magnificent facility in 1997, that we have indeed come a long way. And certainly the bills have changed in accord. I'd like to just throw this open for any further comment on...
I'd like to say something just for a moment. One thing that Reg didn't mention was that McKinnon's golf shop was in that projection where the ladies' shower room is now. I believe it's there. I don't roll around in there very much.
Personal knowledge.
And the other thing that I didn't agree with was that the southern view was just great from a certain place in the men's washroom if they were standing up.
Well, the people like Bajus wouldn't have had any problem. But maybe I should mention the final thing. We did the pro shop as well at the time, and that was done when they were able to move into the basement below the 90s. And then we did the pro shop. A lot of argument about where, on first tee location, and endeavored by some people to make the 17th the permanent starting hole. Remember that?
Yeah.
Voted down vigorously.
Brian?
Yeah, maybe if I could just have a clarification on that point, because it's a point that I've heard many times. People saying, was the 17th the first hole? Where was the pro shop? Maybe one of you gents could just give us
in the basement.
Now, was that a temporary? While you're doing construction?
Temporary while we built the
So it was there, so some people can recall that, but other people say it was never really the official pro shop, but a temporary.
I think there were certain people who would like to have made it permanent.
Mm-hmm. So the pro shop went from the sort of ladies' locker room area to the...
No, there was a pro shop down where the one is now. An old pro shop.
Oh, there was an older pro shop in that location?
Yep.
Oh, I see.
So we destroyed that, and the question came up, were we putting the new one and all sorts of things were thought about wiping out the putting green and putting it somewhere in there, or in the park. Anyway, all sorts of ideas. It ended up where it is now.
You know, there's one thing in connection with all these changes to the building, and one of the problems with what you mentioned is the men's locker room and John's and everything had the best view, except you didn't get any view. And everything was wrong. The dining room looked at some trees instead of overlooking the city. And I understand that, I stand to be corrected on this, is that the plans were drawn, which were the ones that the clubhouse, the first plan. And the plan was to build the clubhouse down on where the 11th tee is, facing the city, so that the clubhouse would have had a beautiful view. All the rooms, the dining rooms, the living rooms and everything would have a beautiful view. And Lady Ivy came out and said, oh no, this is a terrible place. It should be on that big rock in that beautiful room. The only way they could fit the plans was to fit it over this way, and that's why all these changes had to be made over the years. Now, whether that's true or not, that's what I understand happened.
The first, when you first looked at those old drawings, which I did right at the start, I made the judgment that whoever the architect was, he never visited the site at all. He couldn't possibly have done what he did.
Well, all the rocks underneath that they had.
Well, they could blast those, yeah. And it could have been done a hell of a lot differently. Let's leave it at that.
We should send Lady Ivy a bill for several $1 million.
But it was certainly done for some reason, and it's hard to track which architect did what. Some talk about somebody in England, and then a local architect took over for the New Westminster firm. And between them, they just ignored them. They put the locker room closest to the first tee. That's the only rationale you could find for all this. But it would have been totally redesigned. It would have to be. And maybe in the long run, this has turned out all right.
Well, Bill, I'm not sure what was said before I arrived, but
Stanley's always late.
Am I correct in thinking that as the course was being built, and after it was finished, before this clubhouse was built, that the only pro shop and clubhouse facilities, if you could call them that, were where the present equipment shed is?
That's right. That's right. It was just a place to change your shoes.
Yeah.
And the first tee was number 12.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Doug?
Oh, I was just going to suggest that it would be nice if we had the drawing kind of redone, cleaned up, and put down on the wall, because I think a lot of people would be very interested in seeing them.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who look at them and they say, well,
history
I never knew that.
These plans include, we're called Capilano Golf and Country Club. When the clubhouse was built, there were bedrooms upstairs with bathtubs and everything in it.
There was a full set of drawings.
Yeah.
I had it.
And do those show those bedrooms and bathtubs and everything?
This is purely the first two floors. It's all I could find. I spent a few days
when it was first
looking
built,
at everything we had in this club, and I found those by accident inside another roll of drawings.
Yeah, no, there were bedrooms with full facilities and everything up there.
Yeah, the manager's office used to be in the master bedroom at the end.
Yeah.
I remember he got the biggest one.
Well, when it became a fire hazard, nobody wanted to spend a little weekend up there.
Did Miles Ellison ever live up there? When he
No.
was,
Oh, no, just a moment. I don't remember him living up there. I don't remember him having lived up there. Didn't he come straight from Shawnigan?
probably.
And who was Miles Ellison?
He was
The secretary and manager.
Secretary
the
manager.
secretary manager, the first, as I
On
had.
behalf of the British property.
And he was an ex-school master,
He was a principal at Shawnigan.
principal, yes.
Yeah.
And he carried that plus the British atmosphere into his new job. He was also, and this was a great assistance in his career, he was married to one of the Guinness girls, as I understand it. You may verify that.
I'd never heard of that, no. He was married to that ski maker, I know.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm wrong, which is It happened once before.
I know that it was his wife who was married to this dude. That's right.
Well, I think it's fair comment that in Capilano's history, we've had a succession of managers that have contributed in their ways to the development of the clubhouse and to the golf course. And certainly it is worth noting that in this beautiful facility and in this marvelous golf course in 1997, we have one of the finest managers in Terry County that Capilano is likely ever to have known in the past or future.
Bill, if I may just interject one further little thing while we're talking about construction and the clubhouse and all the money that's being spent. I was on either the committee or the board, I can't remember which, and it was decided to build a Capilano room, and it was going to cost $20,000. Today you have meetings here where you approve $1 million as if it was nothing. I tell you, we sweated over that $20,000, the like of which you wouldn't believe. And when the architect said, now you're going to have some nice furnishings, like that table, that'll be another $2. That really got to the Tick Belleries at all. Trying to get $22,000 through for this beautiful room, whereas today they approve $1 million just like that.
Yes, but we had the Guinnesses breathing down our necks then because of the existence of the mortgage, and we didn't have a free hand until the two-tier system ended with the burning.
Before then or not, it's a long time ago.
No, just on this theme that Reg started and Ted is following up. The development of this club was not always an easy thing. Ted just mentioned, I don't remember that particular episode, but you were on the company. And they were the ones who were expending the money, and they kept a very careful eye upon any buck that went out, which was fine because we didn't have any money. But I was part of a committee. I was, I believe, vice president at the time, but I was part of a committee that headed by Cam McLean, who took on the job of developing the club. We had to build a new clubhouse. We had to add a big locker room. It was obvious the one we had was too small. We had to build all this. So we gathered up those members of the club who were interested, and we had a meeting, as Red mentioned.
Do you remember what you had?
Yeah. And on Cam's instigation, we decided to forget the past and proceed with a job which has to be done. When we, I mentioned it wasn't necessary. I was stuck with the job of presenting it to the membership at this Georgia Hotel meeting. And it wasn't too hard because we had solved all the problems beforehand. When it was received unanimously, which amazed me, I couldn't wait to get to the telephone and phone Cam down in the hospital, where I notified him that our work had resulted in a unanimous acceptance by the membership. And he was just tickled to death, as I was too. Being a Scot, the only thing that that still sticks in the back of my mind was after that, I and the committee, Bill Thompson, Les Wagner, Louis McCoy, various others. Were you on the committee at that point?
I can't remember.
No, I don't remember.
I remember the meeting.
Yeah. Anyway, we had dinner together. And it wasn't through generosity or wish to impress. We got out the dice and we rolled for who was going to pay for the dinner. We were all ordering steaks. And guess who got it? And he's never forgotten it either.
You.
I had to pick up the bill for the whole of the committee. But that's just a little aside.
You know, we had a meeting up here one Saturday afternoon on a cloud in the sky. I don't know if you remember. There were 5 capital projects, and I can't remember what they were except the last one. The first 4 went through like nobody's business, so I thought the 5th one was going to go through, and that was a swimming pool. Pat Burns, who some of you will remember, Pat Burns, stood up and he said, "I'm dead against building a swimming pool." He said, "I've got one at home. And on Saturday, my kids attract all the other kids around the neighborhood, and the racket and the noise and everything is just terrible. And that's one of the reasons that I come up here to play golf, is to get away from the swimming pool noise. And I don't think we need it up here." And God damn it, the thing was defeated. It was the only thing as a 5. Only because he couldn't stand the noise around his own pool. Fiddly fudge.
Which makes me recall that some 10 or 15 years ago, I spoke to the then president because I thought we should change our name to Capilano Golf Club, because I don't think that this is a country club, at any rate in the American sense. And I think, like Seattle, which is a premier golf club, it should be just called Capilano Golf Club. And whoever it was said at the time it would be too expensive.
I just write my check, Capilano Golf Club.
So do I.
Mine seems to get cashed all right.
It doesn't take as long.
Well, I don't think any of the current membership miss tennis courts or swimming pools. And certainly those clubs that have gone that route seem now to be getting...
We talked about putting a curling facilities here.
Well,
No, that was on the agenda a few times.
well,
If I remember correctly, that swimming pool is going to be placed right where the 18th green is. And that is probably one of the finest country club, or golf club, I should say, I'll correct that. One of the finest finishing holes in this country.
Yeah.
Doug?
Bill, I was just going to say that, and I think Ted is probably was on the committee or whatever, but I think for the benefit of the taping, that we should have somebody speak to when we bought the club from the Guinness people and that, and what the setup was at that time.
Who would like to take a chance at that?
John McLean might be able to help you on that.
And Peter, are you familiar with some of those?
There's no doubt in my mind that Dan McLean was responsible for ramrodding that through, and it's the best thing that ever happened.
Ramrodding went through.
Buying the club.
Yeah, he and Gordon Bowers.
Well, he put Gordon Bowers in charge of it afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Dan was the president at that time, and he was adamant that it should be done.
What year was that?
I don't remember, but
56 or thereabouts.
60.
Yeah.
We were $40,000 short the day it had to be paid.
That was it was approved at the meeting in the Alhambra room at the Old Georgia Hotel.
Yep.
Bill Hudson was still there.
And Norman Woodall and the McClellans and 2 or 3 others
And what
picked up the
What
extra.
was the purchase price? Wasn't it?
$850,000.
Including all the equipment and
Everything.
everything?
It's popular to think of it as a $1 million
Guinnesses took
purchase.
a mortgage of $450,000 at 4.5%.
The bargain.
Just deal with it.
Yeah, and but the cost to the then members, at least some of them, myself included, was pretty terrifying. You know, when you had a mortgage of your own and 3 kids to bring up, and
You were asked to buy a share for $450.
share plus this debenture.
Wasn't the total purchase price in the range of $850,000?
Yes, it was either 825 or 850.
Half
The
in
mortgage-
cash and half in
The
mortgage.
mortgage was 450.
Well, there were 1,000 shares sold for $500 apiece, so
Yeah.
there's
Yes.
And number of members
Conventions have come along the way.
But there
bought
weren't that,
extra
there weren't that
shares or
many
had to buy
paying
extra
members
shares.
eligible to buy a share. There
No,
were
some people would
450.
buy That had a few extra bucks.
That's right.
Yeah, but-
Not a few extra.
Yeah, but they created a problem, those ones who bought extra shares, because they started to die and all the trust companies started to become shareholders. And that's when Alec Fisher was asked to take on changing our share structure. And you can thank Alec for getting rid of all those trust companies. And
So
getting-
they created another problem in that Holy Bentley bought us some of the extra shares, and he was the result that I'm a member of the golf club, because he gave me one of his shares on the basis that I would join.
Well,
And
that didn't
also,
create
he
a
also
problem,
gave
did
one to, he also gave one to Johnny Russell and to Johnny Johnson. So that was how we, one of the reasons that we're in the golf club. So that's a real problem. You got that.
Okay.
Well, it's,
A whole man breaker.
Gentlemen, it's worth just pausing on the note of some of those names that Doug Bajus has just recalled, and to recognize that one of the reasons that I thought it was very pertinent to invite Doug here today was his knowledge of the golf course itself, and of course the fact that he is a many times club champion. Doug, would you like to comment on the golf course as you see it in the last 3 to 4 years relative to some of those earlier days? Do you feel that we've progressed in a very positive way? And how do you like Capilano in 1997?
Well, I think we have a fantastic golf facility here. It's very different than when I first started to play here, because we didn't really have all the watering systems. So in the summer you would get a heck of a lot of roll, and some of the holes are so different. Like the third hole, a lot of the golfers weren't even necessarily long hit, would hit 4 and 5 iron to the third hole, and the fifth hole. I can remember Johnny Russell once getting home with I think it was an 8 iron on the fifth hole. So there's a great deal of difference between the course then and what it is now, and mainly because of the roll that you get. But it was also interesting that virtually every blue tee today, except for I think number 5, where the old tee used to be. I mean, originally there was kind of only one tee, and those one tees were where the blue tees are now. Some of the holes have been tees have been improved or whatever, like number 3, but that was still where the old tee was, where the present blue tee is. So it would be very tough to play the course and score as well today as it was a number of years ago.
Yes, and it's worth commenting that in 1990, the club decided they were going to move a brand new irrigation system, which, as our chairman of the Greens Committee at that time, Ken Pedlow, described the installation process, which took many months from early spring to late fall, as a process of disruption and disease and decision-making that was very traumatic for the membership as a whole. But the result is that, of course, we installed a state-of-the-art computerized irrigation system, and it has certainly assisted our current golf course superintendent, Dennis Pelgreen, in maintaining the fairways and the greens in absolutely superb condition.
Well, that's always a matter of opinion, I guess, because the architect, when he developed this golf course, it was designed so you could roll the ball up, like on the old Scottish English courses. You didn't have to fly the ball to the hole. Now, all the new modern courses you have to fly the ball to the hole. And whereas when I first joined, you could roll the ball up on.
That's why Ken Black and Stan Leonard always drove with a low hook.
Sure, I mean, so,
Roll.
I don't know whether playing wise, I would, I think perhaps I enjoyed the old way more so than the new way. But that is long gone because all the courses are now where you fly the ball to the hole.
Before we had anything but a hand watering system, it was a lot easier to get into the woods to go right through 5 into down to whatever that street is, practically.
Speaking of the woods, Peter, there have been many changes in the trees around Capilano. Have you any recollections of trees that used to be that are no longer?
You hacked down a few, you should.
Yes, indeed, and I think there's a lot less salal now, thank God, in the woods.
How about that tree in the 6th tee, which had been hacked out in the form of a seat?
Which team?
Well,
supposed to be
behind
a
the
church
6th
field.
tee, it was back in the bush a bit, but maybe 20, 30 feet, but at the time, since the forests were considerably thinner, you could stand on the first tee and see quite clearly this great stump which had been hacked out, a V cut out of it, so you could sit there and look down the 6th at the city.
This is,
Quite an outlook point.
Bill, I made a list of some of the things I remember. These are minor, but they're changes. And I can't, when we came out of the pro shop, when it was part of this building, I can't remember the first tee area too well. It seemed to me we picked up a caddy. In those days, we had caddy down below, and I don't remember all the changes. But there have been quite a few changes right in what is now the front of the building, and I can't remember what they are. First one on the first hole is the bunker on the left, first bunker on the left. That was put in, as I recall, to stop people hooking into the woods and delaying play. And then I think there was 1 or 2 new green bunkers put in down at the green.
There are no bunkers around the green.
There
None
are
at all.
Yeah.
They were put in later on when the hole was short.
Yeah. The second hole, talking about a long drive, if you weren't on the brow of the hill in that second thing, that's ready to put a little thing in. It was a bad drive, eh?
Well, that's right. It used to hit a wedge into there all the time.
Yeah, sure. And then the third hole, of course, they took that tree out of the center of the fairway that was up there for your drive. Fourth hole doesn't seem to have changed much. And the fifth hole, you took the tee out, at least the tree out by the lake.
That was the fault of Brian Open.
Yeah, Wright was taken on and then all the bunkers on the left. I guess they were to catch the long drivers, but I find that my foursome were always going in the trees down by the green on the fifth. That's where I thought it should be. In the 6th, of course, we have a new green. The 7th is the same, I think. The 8th is the same. The 9th has a very popular new tee, I gather. I don't have to play it very much. The 10th hole, they put that bunker on the left, and that was a real shocker because we used to play the carom.
The one going into the green.
Yeah, you always played the
Always
carom
had that
off the
bank
hill
on
onto
the
the
green.
green, and they put that bloody bunker there. And of course, the 11th has had the lake fixed up and a new tee.
In a new
So-
green.
Got a new green?
Yeah,
Completely.
yeah. And the 12th seems to be the same as I remember it. The
Well,
13th,
the trap was shortened.
Shorten that
Hey.
bunker?
The trap was shortened quite a bit.
Piece of
Well,
off the end of the trap.
That's after Edgel couldn't clear it.
Yeah, that's
He
what I
also,
was
they
remember
cut a
that.
piece off the end of it.
Yep.
well, speaking of 12th tee, I always remember when I got on this committee so soon, early, I said we need a nursery green, because that was Dunk Sullivan's #1 priority, and they built a nursery green. It's the best green we got. That's on the 11th hole, the temporary. That was supposed to be a nursery green. The 13th, of course, was a major change when they covered the creek where it used to go right through.
There was a creek there,
Yeah,
wasn't
oh,
there?
sure, and the big problem was not to get across the creek. That was easy enough. But because everything was so dry that you were talking about, if you didn't make the green, the goddamn ball just rolled right back into the stream.
Maybe we could just stop on that point, because it's interesting. As you know, we're having some difficulties with that creek area now, and we've talked about what was the past status of that creek. Now, I've heard everything from it was wide open. I've heard there was a wooden flume. I heard there was a wooden flume that was covered in the middle of the fairway with open at the ends. Can any of you gentlemen?
They're all true.
They're all true.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
So
it was
so
the
it's probably
rolling
the
back.
original intent, like when it was originally, when you first played it, Alice.
Sure,
What did
a creek.
it was a creek, just an open creek.
Well, just like the
Right.
one beside the
14th.
14th.
So all the way across the fairway, so there was
Yeah.
nowhere to run the ball across.
As Ted
No.
says, that if you didn't get onto the green, and 2 or maybe 3 even, it would roll back into the creek anyway.
So it was no doubt changed to cover it in, demand by the membership, but
Well,
that's,
the original green was over to the right of where it is now. And
There was supposed to be a crosswalk, a wooden bridge across. It was never built, but that was in the original plans.
Can
I
you
don't
recall?
remember that, but I remember playing that green.
really.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it was, there weren't any high trees over there on the right hand side.
So you could go over the corner.
Can anyone recall when the ravine in the 13th was actually fully
Well,
covered over?
Long time
I
ago.
can tell you,
Because
because
such a shallow.
I was phoned by Bill McMahon, who was president at the time, and he said, I want to talk to you about what we should put in here, how big, what sort of material, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, other than that, but he was the big, old Bill,
I could-
the big construction man.
Yeah.
I can recall, sure, Patty here, that one time, I remember something about a wooden flume. I can't,
Yeah, there's wooden flumes around there somewhere, I think.
and then I think when Ken Newberry was green chairman, that's when the metal structure went in.
Yeah, that was
But I think
about 15 years ago or something.
It was a big wood stave pipe.
Wood stave pipes.
Yeah.
Well, was it open at all? Or was
No.
it- No, okay.
No.
And Bill McMahon said he was president, and he talked to me, and I said, well, let's put in the same size as before, and we'll put in this sort of pipe, and Bill just organized it as was his wont.
What year was that
I
about,
don't know,
Reg?
whenever he was president.
I can't recall, that'd be early days, when he was president, Bill McMahon.
Bill McMahon.
Ted, speaking of trees, two significant differences with tree planting were on the 12th and the 6th. Because those trees on the left of both of those holes, as you're on the tee, were planted as nurslings. And they made a big difference to those holes. But also, between 4 and 12, there were no trees. And I remember that only too well because I had guests out from the east in the early 50s, and one of them was a pretty good golfer, and I wasn't paying enough attention to him on the 4th tee, and he didn't notice the difference in the color of the flags, and he put his tee shot on the 12th green because he thought that was the green.
Pretty good shot.
Well, I don't know what he objected to.
Both holes are wide open from that tee. There were no trees in between. Those have all been
I
planted.
managed to get on the 12th even with those trees there.
No, but we talk about tree removal, but tree planting has made a big difference to some holes.
Just before we leave 13, are there any pictures, Dave, in the archives of the old 13th when there was a creek or whatever?
No, unfortunately not.
There were big rocks in there.
Terry Cowan was trying to, he said there used to be a grass trap to the right. And we searched and couldn't find it at all. There's no pictures. There was never any organized effort to.
I don't think that was a grass trap. I think that was a regular trap for the green one that was around the corner.
Right. Yeah, that's what Dave
There's several
Sullivan,
impressions.
Looks like it.
that's what Dave Sullivan thought.
Then you just let the grass grow in it.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to the 14th, of course, we have a new green, which we lost one of them and then went to new tees. The 15th, I remember about the 15th is they decided they didn't want a 2-tier green anymore, so they whatever you do, they took the green and made it all flat, so you didn't have the 2-tier. And it didn't take but 2 or 3 years before it went right back to the original 2-tier. Why that happened, you probably would know, but I always remember that. I can't remember much about the 16th other than you shorten it. I've often wondered why there wasn't a green put up on the plateau behind, and you ran that little stream
all
and
stone,
put the
We've always
tee
talked
back.
about it,
And
but that's one of the holes, Ted, where the old tee is still now our blue tee.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
we used to always play it at, what, 220? or
And the
whatever.
17th, I guess we spent $1 million or $2 in front of the green there trying to, I always wondered why they didn't make a pond out of it and forget about trying to dry it
Well,
up.
that raises a question in my mind, Ted. Was there ever free running water in front of the 17th green?
I don't recall natural free running water, except there used to be a lot of
I don't
water
think
running
so.
when we had rain there.
Yeah.
The whole place was originally was a bog.
Yeah.
And,
Well, Ray Sargent used to talk about when he grew up in North Vancouver as a kid. Now, I don't know where he went to school, but he said that he and his buddies used to come and swim in a swimming hole, which is where the 17th green now is, and get home late from school and get a thrashing from his father.
Well, he deserved it too. for other reasons.
But he said that there used to be a swimming
he
hole
was
there.
the grand old man of Capilano.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
One topic that I know I've heard this story from one member, and I can't recall who it was, and sort of relates a little bit of clubhouse and a little bit of golf course, is our 11th tee structure. And I understand that was the sales hut for British Pacific Properties.
Well, that's where the clubhouse was going to be, and that was going to be the
Can you know
center
the
thing.
story of, I can't recall the member that told how they salvaged this from British Pacific Properties, because once they'd had their big selling campaign, they no longer had a use for it, and this fellow told me the story how they got it from British Pacific Properties, and they dragged it up here, and that's where our,
Oh, building.
the building itself, the little log,
Yeah, I remember the building.
yeah, it used to apparently be down at the bottom of the hill there.
Right at the head of
Been
Taylor
down
Way.
there when I came out in
Yeah.
45. I think we were in there 46 or 47, and it was right down where
Right.
it is now, or
Yeah.
right down at the, where
What was the
South
girl's
Drive
name?
comes
May.
up.
Yeah,
And
Taylor
you turn
Way,
around.
right.
May,
You mentioned there was a woman that
Muriel
did all the
May.
selling.
Muriel May.
Muriel May, yeah.
That's right.
And then getting to the 18th, I can't remember much changes there, except where your drive ended used to be clover. And it was clover for years. They got rid of it, of course. And the other thing about the 18th, I wish to Christ they'd cover that gully in front of the tee and slow, speed up play kind of bit. That's all I have on the
Well,
course.
Ted, thank you very much.
What year did they dig up the whole course and a lot of the fairways and
What
took the
year did they
roots
what?
and stones and stuff out and put the sod back? I was just wondering.
We
That
mean
might be
even the
significant.
fairways.
13 was done once.
Oh, they did a whole
The
number of
sixth,
them.
the sixth hole was done,
Bunch of them.
yeah.
That was to get the bumps out.
Pardon?
That was to get the bumps out because.
Yeah, they get the
it
bumps,
stops
but
the
they
fairway
took their
from selling.
What would it be,
roots
Regularly
and,
over the years.
Around 1960, early 60s,
Yeah,
some of
that's
those
what I
were
was
done
trying to remember. This-
when I was here.
What's that fellow's name?
Ted, just before you leave
Something
your
or other.
subject of the different holes, I think that 16th hole is worthy of comment. As you said, it hasn't really changed much, but we used to tee off where the ladies' tee is
Yes.
now,
Yeah.
back in the bush there.
It was the only tee
It
we
was
had.
265 yards,
45.
par 3, and as I remember, the only hole on which Jock never scored
Never
an
did.
That's right.
No one's ever had a hole in one from that back tee.
It was a hell of a shot.
Another thing about the 16th, when the sort of idea was being floated about starting on number 17 as number 1, the question came up, what do we do with 16? And it was suggested that we buy some land back of where the tee is now.
Yes.
And we divert the creek and have a big lake in front
Yes.
of the green, and then put the green itself right up close to as high up the bank as you could get. It would be a really tough par 4. It would require a lot of finesse.
Jock was against that. wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, it didn't go anywhere because the change to the 17th as the first was abandoned and sold as they changed to the 16th.
Yeah, but they were talking about buying that even
Land was,
after, for
Yeah.
some time, before those houses went in.
There was always
We owned that
comments.
land.
Hmm?
We owned that land and sold it.
Oh, did we?
Yeah,
Yes.
there are 5 acres in there that were sold because we couldn't figure out any proper use for it, really, when it came down to it.
One of the comments about the 16th used to always be that it was a real bastard hole because it really wasn't a par 3 and it wasn't a par 4. It was supposedly one of the longest par 3s in the world. And it was really, you know, they used to have a deal where your par 3s could be between this and this distance. And the 16th was past that, but it was too short for a par 4. So there was always arguments and, you know, should we make it a par 4 and put
Did you
the
ever get
green
on?
up there?
Oh, sure he did. Sure he did.
Yeah, with a pilot.
middle of the summer, Alex.
I think the actual longest distance there was something like 256 yards.
That's around that.
And I can remember when we had the Canadian Amateur here in 1954, there were guys getting on that green with a 3-iron, maybe a 2. But I can remember them getting on with irons. Now,
Alex says
these
it's
were,
5.
And I remember that guy not giving Campbell that 16
Memories
putt
get
too.
that was the same tournament.
Does anyone remember when Gene Sarazen was here playing Capilano? That would be
That was
back
1963.
Shell's Wonderful World of Golf.
About that
There's
time.
Ryan.
And one of the comments apropos of our par 3s was when he visualized the ninth, and he looked up and he saw that great bank of traps on the right side of the ninth green, and made a comment to the effect that to him constituted one of the finest par 3 holes that he'd ever played anywhere.
Well, he said that the finest, most difficult shot on the golf course was from the blue tees as far back as you could get them and practically put the pin out on the road. He said that was,
What hole?
There on the
no,
ninth.
he said that was the shot to make.
You know, talking about the course, I was asked to chair a committee to look at excess land, and there were 5 areas, it doesn't matter very much, but 2 I always remember. Jock wanted the canyon. There was talk about building condominiums in that valley between 1 and 13. There, and Jock said, yeah, and Jock said, no, make it a bird refuge. And Jack Poole, I asked him to sit on the committee, and he said, if you can get that spot where the maintenance shed is rezoned, he says, I will rent that from you for $220,000 a year. Build a couple of high rises.
Look, one comment speaking of the course, the 13th, there was a photograph that used to be on this floor in that corridor out there, taken, I believe, before the war, from the tee. And there was a group out there where a normal drive would be, and one of them was wearing +4s. You could see his shoes. Now, you can barely see the top of a person's head at that same spot.
The way the fairway is.
The way the
yeah.
sinkage that's
I
taken.
saw it being leveled once too.
What hole is this?
13.
13.
I don't know what happened to that picture, but it was quite interesting.
Just going back to our trees, our marvelous trees, it's worth remembering that with all of the clear cutting that took place to start the golf course up back in the 30s, that we've seen a couple of generations of new growth here at Capilano, and almost all of the current trees that line our fairways are second and third growth at the very least.
I wonder if today's environmentalists would have let us cut down those trees.
It's a very good
No.
point.
Are we under any restraint as far as that's concerned?
No, not at this point.
I guess the other thing too is when we had the course rezoned from housing to whatever the number.
Recreation.
Recreation, that was I think one of the big things we did as far as the course, and thank Derek Berry for that.
Well, gentlemen, we're coming within the last few minutes of this session at the moment. Are there any compelling overviews either on the clubhouse or the golf course that any of you would like to contribute?
I've got one, Bill.
Reg?
I would like to suggest that those two drawings be dealt with, maybe redrawn, made into a form where they can be saved forever, and even one copy could be in the corridor down there.
You signed it, Ted.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. And on that note, we will conclude this session for the moment.
In some ways, as it was a great many years ago, like looking up the 13th hole and the trees were in color. It was a beautiful view from there, and I imagine to compare it today, it might be quite dramatically different. I'll dig them up. Dave,
Good.
could you handle them?
No. Brian is the chairman of the archives committee, so he's the man.
Sure, be pleased to have them.
You should, they're slides, and could you convert them to
Prints? Sure.
So that,
Oh, yeah, they do a fantastic
Sure.
job now.
Oh, yeah, no problem at all. Sure, pleased to
well,
have
I'll
them.
see what I can dig up.
Sure.
I gave them a colored film of playing with my father and Mr. Philip Malcolm and Jamie Malcolm up here before I joined up for that celebration they had to Garth. I've never seen it since, and every time I ask for it, I never get it back. That's a colored film of when we played this course before the war.
We have that, Ted, in the archives.
Do you have
That
it?
is, we've
Oh.
even discussed having it put on videotape.
Oh, that's long as, no, I don't need it back. I just thought it was lost.
Well, gentlemen, I think what we'll do, we'll take Doug Bajus' suggestion. We'll run the other side of the
It's running
tape
now.
for another 15 minutes, and then we have lunch that is already available at the end of the room. In 15 minutes, we'll adjourn to the bar and have a little lunch.
I make myself a martini now with the ice melt for 15
You
minutes.
could indeed, could indeed.
Better hurry up, Ted. Might be third or fourth in line.
Yeah, right.
Gosh, there's some old memories already.
It's always interesting to think back to some of the great events on the golf course too. And one thinks back not only to the World Amateur, but the Peter Jackson before that and the Canadian Amateur those years ago that Peter was referring to.
I could remember a good story that Peter Bentley told me about the Canadian Amateur in 1954. And of course it was match play, I guess medal call, or it was match play. And anyways, there was quite a group of Californians that had come up to play in the event, and they considered themselves to be the favorites. So Peter had qualified for match play, and all the competitors were around the board looking at the draw. So one of the Californians said, "Well, who's that? Who's this Bentley?" And the guy said, "Oh, he's a local." So with that, the Californian kind of cursed and said, "Oh, darn, he really wanted a good warm-up." So of course Peter overheard this, and they went off to play their round. And the first hole, Peter hit it this California hit it right down the middle, and Peter hit his shots off to the right underneath the boughs of the trees. So with that, the Californian turned to his buddies, "Well, I'll see you in like a couple hours," indicating that he'd have Peter dusted off by 10 or 11 holes and he'd be back. Anyways, away they went. Peter got his ball on the first hole, and from underneath the woods, put it to about a foot from the hole, tapped it in for 3 to win the hole. Make a long story short, Peter was 7 under par after 13 holes, tapped in on 13 to win the match, and shook his hand and said, "I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better game."
Very good.
That's a classic, wonderful.
But you know, that fellow who said I didn't give you that putt on the 16th that year, he was subsequently disqualified.
Campbell?
No, he was the one.
Campbell was the one that,
Lost.
Walked away. And,
No, the fellow who won it, he was disqualified from entering any California competition a year later.
Really?
yeah, what was his
But
name?
Colin-
Boucher or Boucher or Boucher or Boucher or something.
Boucher. But Colin Rankin was the referee of that match, and he was at that time, I think, either president of the RCGA or chairman of the Rules Committee, and really knew the game. And they, as you know, they had been giving each other these all the way around. And on the 16th, he went to Boucher and said to him, "Did you concede that putt?" Boucher said, "No, I didn't."
I thought Campbell picked up his ball and Boucher said, "I didn't give you the
No,
ball."
no, he didn't. He picked up his ball. Then Rankin went to Boucher and said, "Did you concede that putt?" Boucher said, "No, he won the hole." That's
Yeah, I
a
think that
fact.
was right, yeah.
Were all of you here at the time of the Shell Wonderful World of Golf between George Knudsen and Stan Leonard?
Yep.
Yeah, I was here.
I wasn't here, I was away.
That must have been a great event. And is it true that the scores that were shot were in fact the lowest combined competitive scores that Capilano has known?
No.
No.
No?
Far from it.
Mengert and,
Weston.
Weston, Ray Weston, they had, in one of their matches, they were 62 and a 61, or 62 and a 63.
Was Mengert the one who was disqualified in the Canadian Open at Shaughnessy?
Fred Wood had a 62 year, it was the record for many years on the rock.
Fellow from Spokane?
No, but they had, that was
Remember
what
Jack Nicholas
they had
got
in
in
the
and-
first round of the PNGA. Remember we had the
Lodged a
PNGA
couple of
here?
complaints
Well,
about
I'm talking
Mengert,
about
the way he marked his ball.
competitive golf only.
And he was
This was
disqualified?
in the BC
Was
amateurs.
it Mengert?
I think it was, yeah.
But this was here at Capilano where Mengert played in
Harry Guy.
no, Ray Weston. And it was a 36-hole semifinal. No, finals.
That was the semifinals,
Semifinal.
36 holes in the
Yeah,
semis.
and in the morning, Weston was 62 and Mengert 61 or something like that.
Well, as I remember it, I think that Mengert was 6 down in the morning round. And then he shot a 62 in the afternoon.
Oh, maybe
Yeah.
Our guy
I
sat
was
next to Harry Guyvan at a black tie dinner a couple of years ago. And I said, "You played a lot of fellows from British Columbia in your time." He's still playing and playing very well. I said, "Who in your opinion was the best amateur we ever produced?" There are a lot of good ones if you think back. And he didn't hesitate a second. He said, "Ken Black."
Sure.
Yeah.
Just like that. He didn't say Stan Leonard, Freddie Wood, or any of the rest. He said, "Ken Black."
You see, Gordon Taylor died last week.
Yes,
did he?
I saw
Yeah.
that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Great
Are
guy.
you going to tape this now?
You've been taped for the last 10 minutes, and
Oh,
you're
that was-
continuing
oh,
on.
okay.
And I think those names that you've mentioned are certainly part of the lore of this club. And Gordon Taylor, I believe, played here on a number of occasions, did he not?
Yes, he did, and he and Kenny Black were finalists in the Canadian Amateur.
You were
It was-
a member of Point Grey, Alec. Did you follow Hagan and Hart and Smith the time they played Dunk Sutherland and Davy
No,
Black?
No, I didn't.
And Davy and Dunk 1, 3, and 2, and I tell you, the knee plus ultra that was flowing in the 19th hole that day was really something. I think a minute flowed before the game started as far as Hagan was concerned.
Mention of Ken Black's name, just give me a second. Ken died, as we all know, ranging up to a year ago. And his daughter, Barbara, had an affair up here, to which she invited a lot of Ken's old friends, as she remembered them. And I was here, but one person I noticed who was absent was Brian Hopkins, who was one of the fine amateurs of the city. And I said, I didn't see you up at this event at the club. He said, well, the only reason was, he said, I didn't hear about it. Why? Barbara probably just forgot it. But he said one of his greatest memories was playing golf with Ken Black, when the two of them were junior members, I guess, at Shaughnessy. He said that in the club championship finals up there, he and Ken were playing one another, and he said, I'll never forget, at the end of 9 holes, I was 8 down to Ken.
Well, if he'd got going, he probably could have taken them extra holes.
Anyway, he said, we decided, well, it was silly, but the game was over in a couple more holes. But he said, we decided, instead of stopping that, we played a lot of golf together, he said, we decided to finish the game anyway.
Bill?
And he said, I played the back 9 in 2 under par. Now he said, you'd figure I'd win a few holes in there, wouldn't you? I wasn't a damn bit better at the end of the second 9.
Doug?
You mentioned about the show Wonderful World of Golf. Well, I was asked to be the referee at that match, and one very interesting thing, which could have been a disaster, but on the 18th hole, the match was very, very close, as you know, and on the 18th hole, George Knudsen hooked his ball a bit, and just short of the bunker on the left-hand side, there is an old water thing, and with a wooden cover over it. And on the edge of his ball was sitting just above the edge of this cover and kind of teetering there, or darn near teetering there, but it was a beautiful lie. And of course he could have got relief, but he might not have, it was kind of rough in there, so he could have had a poor lie. So he elected to play it. And I was standing there, and as referee, I wondered what the hell would happen if as he was shooting, the ball moved. What am I going to do, or what am I going to say? It's on TV around the world and everything. Am I going to disqualify him or what? But fortunately, the ball didn't move. Oh, I was so scared. I just didn't know what to do if that had happened. But, you know, if he had called it on himself, okay. But if I had to call it, it would have been a disaster.
David Harper has a question.
Pertinent to the course only. If you look at the pictures down in the corridor by the grill, there is a bridge over the Haddon Creek.
13? 14.
14.
Back of 14.
Between the 13th and 14th. What was that?
It was just over the creek, up the back of the green.
Yeah, back of the 14th green, that's what that
Way at the
picture is.
back on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
And it was just a creek for people who dunked a ball or lost a ball on the far side. They could go across that bridge and pick it up.
Yeah.
Speaking
You
of
seem to know a lot about these places.
I've been in
Speaking of the 13th ravine and the banks that are currently giving us some concern, Brian, do you have any thoughts about whether or not that 13th ravine and so forth is going to be changed yet again?
Well, I think it's at this point depends upon the reports we get from the engineers as to the status of that pipe. If ultimately it came down to a decision that it has to be completely replaced in its entirety.
Is that from the lake or just down here?
No, down here. This is at the bottom of the 13th gully there. If it has to be completely replaced, and of course that could bring into fisheries and all sorts of complications. But if it has to be replaced, I suppose that would be when you would entertain, I'll use the word entertain, any changes rather than just a replacement of what's there. It certainly has been talked about. I know even by our current captain. I mean, it sounds very, very interesting to have an open creek through there, but history tells you something. That if it was open one time and it was closed in for a reason. And I think it would be a very difficult situation for many of our members, but certainly would be something to investigate.
Is the culvert itself okay?
Well, I understand that our consulting architect is coming here tomorrow
Yes.
to look at it. One of the problems that I see with ever putting a creek, which could be lovely, but today we have the cart path, and if we leave
When you can
the
get to use a
eroded
cart.
bank where it is, then the cart path would virtually go in front of the green, which wouldn't be very nice.
No, you can
You know, Bill, listening to Brian a moment ago reminds me of what I think may have been his first Calcutta here. He was a new member anyway at the time. And Len Norris was on his team. And I think Brian shot a 66 with his ball, and the team didn't qualify for city play. And Len Norris, being the kind of guy he is, never played in another competition after that. He said, I and the other two guys were utterly hopeless, and here's our captain having the best round he ever had in the club. Don't qualify.
I remember that.
Is that right,
What
Brian?
about that pipe down from the lake, which always seems to be ready to disintegrate?
Well, we've got a number of replacement sections. It's basically been replaced in its entirety from the intake from Brothers Creek down to the lakes, and in a number of sections from the lake down to the club. But there still is a sizable portion of that pipe, which is the original wood stave pipe, and is prone to leaks and.
Would we be liable if that two property owners, if that ever broke?
I suppose we would probably. I mean, there is shut-offs on there, and we do have
You
leaks.
can shut it off.
That's right. But certainly the engineers have investigated relocating that pipe into the sort of road allowance so it's a little more accessible. The problem now is that the pipe goes through some of the easement areas in the back of the lots, and of course they're now overgrown with trees, and hot tubs have been put on top, and rose gardens, and so it's a little difficult to get in there. That's the real problem with the pipe. So,
Plus, evidently, we don't even have any thing to do with that we own the lake or have right to the lake, or we don't have anything.
We do.
written
We
down.
own the lakes.
I don't think it's
yes,
written.
Absolutely, we own the lakes, and then we have a water license to use the water in the lakes. But I think it runs for it was 99 years or something.
One of the outstanding experiences we had when we were doing the irrigation system in 1990 was the cooperation of the city of West Vancouver, their engineers, the whole question of mutual agreement on how we were going to develop our irrigation system and how we might come to depend upon the West Vancouver water supply temporarily. And then it was quite clear that from time to time, Capilano, with its wonderful water reserve in the Alveden Lakes, might have been able to reciprocate if West Vancouver got into problems.
You know,
So we have an excellent relationship, I think, with the engineering department, particularly in regard to waterworks.
I'd like
with
to
West Vancouver.
second that with West Van, because when we managed to become rezoned, it was only because West Vancouver recommended it to us. We didn't know it could be done. They said, we'll apply for you. And we said, well, why would you do this favor for us? He said, well, if you ever sold that for housing, we'd have to build schools and sewers and water mains. We don't want any part of that.
Do I understand correctly that Point Grey, who was spearheading this thing about the assessments, the case was lost?
That's right.
Recently?
That's right. Was lost. This not assessments. What they lost an appeal regarding interest income earned. They lost that. Actually, the assessment situation has turned favorable, and that the assessment authority has been lowering the assessments. Ours has lowered, I think, about some $4 million over the last 5 years, and they're now going back to the clubs who did appeal their earlier assessments and basically making a deal with them. We have not made our deal yet, but it's certainly, so we can either make a deal with them or we can wait and go to the full appeal and get the assessment appealed to revise the prior assessment. But certainly...
Is this investment income you're talking about?
On one hand, yes, the investment income is a matter that they lost, and
Yes.
they haven't decided whether they're going to appeal. The property assessment has turned favorable for the golf clubs, so that's some good news there.
You can build that swimming pool now.
Maybe it's off the point, Brian, but does this mean that all of that club's income is subject to taxation, or on a net income
I believe
basis,
it
or
was
just the investment?
Just the investment is
Just
what I,
the-
that's what I
is
understand.
subject to tax?
Yeah, maybe, right, so it would be a matter of how far back or
But
what our
that's not
liability
new,
would be.
We always worried about that up here.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, we're coming close to the end, and I just want to remind you that in 1988, we celebrated our 50th anniversary. And if you look ahead to our 100th anniversary in the year
come on now.
2038,
I'll be there.
things may be a little different around here. Would anyone clairvoyant enough to speak on the subject predict what this club might be like 50 years from now?
You think they'll have golf
With
courses?
a little luck, it'll be the same.
No reason why not.
Hopefully. I think our forefathers and our current fathers and our future fathers will strive to retain what we've got and maintain it in its brilliance and its
Do you think the
wonderful.
Indians will allow us to play here?
I think that they love us. They see us as the people who have conserved the environment. We've done wonderful things for it. We've not intruded with tennis courts and swimming pools and the like. We still have bears and coyotes and deer who love the environment here. So
Coyotes.
somebody must have done something right.
Excuse me, Bill, there's one thing that I never hear mentioned, and I've always wanted to speak in the Indian. The odd place we see apple trees, why were they there? That log has now disappeared, it's rotted away where they had the marriage ceremony behind the 6th tee. Nobody has ever sent out a memo what all that represented, what was here before we arrived on the scene.
Very interesting, Ted. Food for thought.
Well, I will predict an answer to your question, Bill, that by the year 2038, unless our federal and provincial governments change their policies on Aboriginal matters, that this place will be owned by the Squamish, and it'll be all high-rises, and the golf course will have gone. I hope that doesn't happen, but there's going to have to be a drastic direction on the
Don't
part of
vote
our
Liberal, don't
politicians.
vote NDP, I got the message.
Well, that certainly is the darkest possible scenario.
I'll be here.
You'd be really Rafe Mayor too.
Yes, you will.
Brian, what is our
You police
public relations relationship to the Indians? Bill was saying that we're regarded, or do we have any?
I would say at this point, we do not have any.
Have to bring Edgar back.
It'd be interesting to know what I've heard people talking about, said that this wasn't sort of an area that they populated, that they set down near the mouths of the river.
Yes.
I mean, this would have been pretty rugged ground to get up here hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, but they had that wedding log down
Yeah, that's-
behind the 6th tee.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Well, it was in perfect condition when it first, oh, yes. But it's gradually rotted away, the log, and that's where they had the final stages of the wedding ceremonies, I understand.
All I can say, it must have been a strong bride to get up here.
Brian,
Well, you know.
years ago,
It's a long trip over, the short trip back, or vice versa.
years ago, Brian, one of our members said to me that he would like to donate a totem pole to the club. And of course, everybody was shocked. We mustn't affiliate ourselves with the Indians, but should we?
No?
I'd stay away from it.
That's an interesting point.
Well, we've got an Indian name to the club.
That's right.
Brian, you were our captain for many years, as I remember. This is kind of a side, but in the course of going through my diaries in the hope of finding a gem that I could bring up at the meeting here, I came upon one thing which has long since disappeared, and that was the old captain vice president, or captain vice captain golf tournament.
Well, we have the Beat the Elite, which is, as the president, the captain, and the vice president, and the pro. So that's an annual event where we kind of do battle against the membership.
I don't advocate it particularly.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, well, that probably took its place. Since I've been around,
Yeah.
there wasn't a captain, vice captain tournament, but I think the Beat the Elite probably kind of took the place of that event, I would say.
And Beat the Elite has been a very popular contest. There's good feeling about it. And
Especially last year when the executives skunked everyone.
Bill, I'm afraid I'm taking the floor a little too much, but you talk about our relationship with the Indians. After all, the club is an Indian name.
Yes.
And I always remember one of the matches against Seattle Golf Club or Broadmoor when we all stayed at the Camlin Hotel. My brother-in-law, Jeff Tullich, who was a member here, was in New York, and he flew back to play in the tournament in Seattle. And in New York, he'd got one of these places where they print the headlines of newspapers, and he'd got about a dozen of them. And he put them on the check-in desk at the Camlin Hotel as we checked in, and here are all these newspapers sitting there with the headlines: Capilano's in town, firemen and police alerted. The Indians.
there's no need for it, too.
Well, the question comes up in my mind, and I'm reminded of it because of the recent coverage of Chief Joe Capilano's gravesite just down near Park Royal. Whether or not the people that decided to call Capilano Golf Club chose that name relative to other names being considered. Does anyone know?
That's a good question.
I'm sure it
How
must
we
be
got to be
in,
called Capilano?
Surely
it must
was-
be in hostile.
Surely it was because the river runs
Yeah, I think so,
alongside.
just the river.
So it was
Maybe.
really adopting an area name rather than specifically honoring the old chief or...
It was this stream name that runs down here below the...
Haddon Creek, isn't it?
And Brothers.
Brothers further down.
The upper level.
Further down.
Yeah, Brothers
Yeah.
Creek is
It's
west
Haddon Creek.
of Highland Drive.
By the mosque, the
Synagogue.
It'll never be finished anyway.
Same thing.
Well, gentlemen, it only remains for me to thank you all very much for coming this morning, and I think it's been a most successful roundelay. And we'll look forward to listening to the tape. And David Harper, I want to thank you on
Throw money,
behalf
Bill.
of
Throw
all of
money.
us.
Throw
There
money.
will be money, there will be money.
I have to Harry's coat clean.
But
Hey,
certainly,
the work's lasted, but the pay's good.
certainly I'm personally very pleased that the Archives Committee have continued this thrust, and let's look forward to more of the same at some future point.
Well, Bill, just mentioning the taping that you were in Alec, and which was done nearly 5 years ago.
Yes.
If you fellows want to hear some good stories about Capilano, you should borrow the tape and hear about the famous shoes.
Maybe it should be spliced with this one.
Well, thank you, and welcome to the bar, and let's have a little lunch.
Oh, no, this is great fun for all the legends and members for so long and reminiscing.
Absolutely.
The last we used to have.
Ted, thank you very much. This is really good.
By the way, the tape is still
I
running, so
appreciate
don't,
the good stuff you brought in, especially that.
What's your language?
That was
Those
The way you brought in the
What's your
whole
language?
terrific. That was really good.
Come down the hill,
That-
where those vine maples are.
Thank you.
That's where we go into the house. And you go in there, there's a shelf in there. That's where you want to,
I'll put it on one
want
side.
to have it, up here. You couldn't have it on one side. But that's what he wants to do. But I think it's a similar situation. We did that, one thing on a piece, that's one thing. Then you got to get in there. They actually have to down and sit down in there. That's what you have to do. Otherwise,
I just want to make sure everyone knows, there's sandwiches and soup on the middle table right here.
Where it is now.
oh, yeah, well, if you're on the right-hand side, yeah.
Make yourself
Right on the
Yeah,
middle of the
no,
green.
I think the rest of it is maybe not really. Because that's what he'll have to have. No, the reason I know we have title to that is because it's part of our accessories. Yeah, so we have title.
Terry was, Terry was our last green meeting.
Me, anyway.
We don't understand.
No, I think, no, there isn't any agreement or any right-of-way agreement with the municipality as far as the water line. It's just, it was just put in, right? So there's, like normally if you were somebody in there, you have an agreement with the municipality, you know, who's responsible, and we don't, it's just there. They seem to know about it.
And did
They don't know anything.
He's getting slower.
I always enjoy it. We're gonna go down and play golf.
Did you go down with Keenan or something, or Noble, or?
No, we're going to go Noble and play Keenan
Vancouver's theology.
I played here yet.
When the question of honorary doctorates came up,
well, Bellingham North, have you played it?
No.
It's a beautiful golf course, but there are no trees around.
Harry, haven't you got a drink?
Get a wind there to dry it.
Haven't you got a drink?
I'm not gonna have two.
Why not? You'll never get another free one.
Because I had two before dinner tonight.
And they play regular green golf, kind of neat.
Mind you, I'm on a practice. I've been on the wagon all of January.
Good. Well, it's February now.
I haven't towed away.
Because I'm on the bayou.
I found out at exactly noon on Saturday.
That's your,
This year is.
One of the things that I found enjoyable about this was,
And that's about it.
I kind of forgot about my view. See, I have that.
I know these fill out like garbage coming in. There are certain things that
well, Harry, the point, I have a funny attitude. I'm on the Irish.
I need it.
You know, if the Queen comes to play golf here in Teesdale,
I was
we don't
supposed to
have
be
to worry about
president after.
our guys. But it's just the little things.
I spent 3 or 4 years on this.
You know, 50 years in the
You know, I just
they're interesting. You know, they're momentum.
Say when you get a.
take it out first.
It's not up for years, perhaps.
Well, you know, a number of them. Well, they all lived in Victoria?
Some things start out.
That's what I think about the new format. You know, people, the thing is, you're always fighting on the archetype. Yeah, but that's but, you know, if you go back, let me tell you something.
It is not.
I went back to visit the crop where my mother was a dirt floor. And I say, how wonderful it was to have this. Some night, the family was all sitting around with some candles. Were they talking politics or were they talking crop?
Get out of there. They're gonna stay the next day.
I think that's, but,
This, these
you
drawings.
know,
There.
you could
Yeah, okay.
preserve this for 1,000 years.
Well, no, we need.
No.
What I want to do.
The impact it would have.
Oh, yeah.
That's why it's great.
We did play there quite a bit.
We need a permanent thing. Covered communities. Because it has to be retraced
I wonder, you know, if they're really good properties.
Would you
They can figure out and read as the old handwriting.
Louisiana law is $150 per item. It was, wouldn't change if Well, to the golf, but to the
Club or?
No, the course.
Through this thinking,
Something in
then
the road, I think,
developing
really where the, most of us, let's get back to this. The very best and certainly by far the best in Canada, and probably on the continent.
With the old bike scale, you could stand.
We haven't changed the characteristics. A little bit here, a little bit over here. Except when he came back here, after the war. I guess that's a big tragedy.
whenever he's announced, places
I bear in mind.
Kiss.
Because we were having trouble. Somebody did a long post. Getting into the bush and here in the building.
Went out on his own.
Break the leg. That's the reason that's long traffic there. I teased because of the danger to the box.
Every once in a while, you
Remember Hickory?
I got into a whole bunch of
Provisions. Fountains have changed, eh?
Somebody got a boat.
Yeah, okay, no, I'll, what would you do if you want to give it, one power, both powers to Terry's for safekeeping?
What?
Right?
But
And then, okay.
that hole,
this man.
We'll put it on here for safekeeping and we'll follow. But just say that we need to get a calligrapher to go over one set, we keep one set as an original set.
But I hope to get
What would you say? I've often thought about
next week.
that you remember when we came down here, you made that first car.
I was a real basket.
Well,
Pick that stroke out by putting
Speak to Mr. Gowans. Yeah, it's not what it is, because they were all stamped up, having the
on
arrows.
the top
on the top by
and
the.
put the leg back. You make that 5.
Let's speak to Terry.
You wouldn't lose any stroke. It would be,
Okay, all right.
it would be tougher that way, but it would be fair.
16 start.
Number from 1 to 14 is a par 4.
All right.
Fully disrupted my sense.
They should be done nicely.
Yes.
No, I agree.
Also, of course, it's a friendly home for members. You know, wide fairway.
Very impressive 2 days.
On a club course, starting position became and that's when it was degenerated. It's an easy road.
Lurching into the ball.
They're gonna get put my gear downstairs.
You can leave it here, Peter.
Gotta get down to my locker.
What time are you playing golf?
Oh, it may be dark before we get out of here.
One thing they didn't discuss is how the atmosphere. Ted was talking earlier. Ted was.
They had a fire down in the maintenance shed. I wonder if they were down there.
He used to do this when I did too. We'd come up here on Tuesday afternoon.
Might be anything down in the maintenance shed.
Started working himself out in the men's and we'd stay for a bit. And probably
Way, way back.
The other thing about the old days,
they were having a meeting.
They have no memory.
But not really getting second break,
Heard the first tape.
say 6 or 7. So we go all play together. And we get around here. Whoever is ready got up and hit. Some of those things, I think that's changed mainly because of the size of the business.
Much more formalized. Well, it was a day, you could just come up anytime.
Oh, yes. Well, we're lucky to get here sometimes. I just come up from Sunday. That's why I played with all these old guys that are down there. Pictured in the, in the grill, and the hall. They're like, oh, people like Gravy, Tommy Allen. They were all 20 years older than that.
Well, it's a story time for a while, but do they move on better? Reg, if you want some coffee spilled under your jacket, I'm available.
Some what?
Coffee spilled under your jacket, I'm available.
Might improve the color. Shouldn't do anything with Harry at all.
Pretty nifty.
Doesn't he with his tie matching?
Well, I talked to Harry this morning, he said he was spending all day. We'll have to go downtown and rescue some banker or something like that. At least wear a tie.
Everything worked out really good. Just plain old fashioned trap.
Well, I didn't wear a tie because I was working for the staff. I was Well, it's very interesting, you know, reading all this. One question, Reg, we keep our archives now down in what is known as line fault. All concrete, ceiling concrete, floors concrete, all the walls concrete. Why was that done?
Case of fire, I guess.
Yeah, but it's all concrete.
No, but
It really technically should have a halogen. All gas. That's the finest. Going into action, and there's no way that any flame could get anything. Whereas the specialist, all it does is cover the whole goddamn thing. Now, the gas, what's in there now? Somebody look at the halogen, or some of the gas. And that is correct. No water, no fire, safeguarding doctor.
Yeah, well, we done kitchens the next best thing. Everything is off the floor. And everything is in plastic containers.
So now we have the tray, it's not as big as the
Right there.
and it's signed by the president.
How does that work?
It's gas. Fire where water is from, maybe whatever it is, covered in water, might put the fire out. But the sad thing the water does is much the fire.
Well, maybe we should call on you as a starter to, because we had the fire marshal up in West Vancouver because there was a wooden door. We asked his advice whether we should have a steel-clad door or, he said it was all right.
Publish one story every newsletter.
Hey, make the
Now, that's a self-contained unit in that area.
That's what we use to.
Like I said, the whole entourage of caddies. Harvey looks out, there's the wind blowing in, and you can see the white caps on the Fifth Lake. And
You got a time yet?
Give me the ball.
I just phoned down.
No, I'm not.
All right.
I think I have some lunch.
Well, I'm going to have some lunch. I'm going to turn the recording to myself.
Matter of fact, he.
It's not going now.
Oh, yeah.
I remember